Namaste everyone, I'm Vikram. I'm a graduate from Cardiff University and I serve NHSF UK Sampradaya team. Yashoda is a graduate of Leeds University and serves NHSF UK on the Sanskar team of National Committee. We have this year at NHSF UK looked at 12 highly significant female saints, and we've looked at the significance of their work and how it shaped Bharat. These 12 great saints of Bharat that we covered earlier this year were instrumental in shaping India. One very important saint is Sri Andal Devi, an avatar of Sri Mahalakshmi Mata. So today we're going to be talking about Sri Andal, her work, the spiritual significance of that work, and the month of Margazhi or Margasisha, as it's otherwise known as. Yashoda?
Yeah, we're going to talk about how this little girl called Andal completely revolutionized the Bhakti movement, the effects of which spread throughout Bharat. She is known for composing very highly significant verses, poetic verses, dedicated to Krishna Bhagavan, who she was an ardent devotee of, and who she also eventually married. So we're going to see all of that.
So in summary of what we'll explore, we'll look at Andal Devi's background, life and significance. We'll look at her work, the Thiruppavai, an example of that, what that means, explore the language that she uses, wider significance of Margasisha, and finally we'll also look at what we as Hindu students can do to learn a bit more and why actually we should be listening in. So Yashoda, tell me a little about Andal Devi.
So we'll start with a short story. Setting, let's go to 8th century Bharat in a small town called Srivilliputturu, where there was a devotee of Vishnu called Vishnu Chitta, who's also later was known as Periyarvar. So he had this beautiful small house and a nice flower garden and tulsi garden. And because he was an ardent devotee of Vishnu, he would go to this garden every day and pick these flowers and tulsi to make garlands to then give to the local temple for worship. So one day he went into this tulsi garden and he heard the cries of a baby. So he went towards that part of the garden and under the shade of a tulsi plant, he found a baby girl. So he was quite shocked, but also quite joyful. And he took this baby girl in and adopted her as his own daughter and named her Kode.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, and Kode, because he was an ardent devotee of Vishnu, the home environment was very devotional. And Kode grew up kind of imbuing all the knowledge and wisdom of Periyarvar. So she learned about, how to worship, about singing songs about Krishna, and she kept listening to the stories of Krishna Lila and all the philosophy and the Tamil poetry and all of that she was taking in. So she saw her father and Guru, Periyarvar. So Periyarvar was a guru figure as well as a father figure to her. So as she was growing up, this devotion that she had, this bhakti that she had, grew and matured. And once she went to a stage where she made a decision that she wasn't going to marry anyone other than Krishna, which, no one really understood that, right? And
that is actually incredible.
Yeah, right. We don't think like that. So see, she she made this resolve that she wasn't going to think of a human in that light. So as she was doing this, she would imagine herself as Krishna's bride. So she would make these sort of flower garlands, and then she would decorate herself as a bride and then wear these garlands. And then
often in art, we see this imagery.
We see this imagery, right? Like of a mirror and Kode wearing this garland, looking at the mirror. And so she'd admire herself as thinking of herself as Krishna's bride, and then give that garland to Periyarvar to then give to the temple. Now, Periyarvar didn't know about this, obviously. So he would just give these garlands into the temple until one day, as he was about to give the garland in, he saw a hair stuck, one of Kodai's hairs stuck to the garland. He was really upset and he was quite disappointed. And Kodai got a big telling off for wearing something before offering it to Bhagavan. So he obviously got rid of that garland and made a new garland and gave that to him. And Kodai was completely heartbroken because for her Krishna, her Vishnu didn't accept her garland. So she was completely heartbroken in tears. And that night, Vishnu came into Vishnu Chitta or Periyar's dream. And he said, why didn't you give me the garland worn by Kodai? I actually prefer that garland over the new one because I want the smell of Kodai to be, Kodai's body to be on the garland because that's what I enjoy most. And as you can imagine, Vishnu Chitta was completely overcome by emotion when he woke up and he was in tears, and he was very joyful, but he was also a bit remorseful that he didn't understand the depth and the intensity of Kodai's love for Krishna. So that's when Kodai started being called Andal. So Andal is she who rules Bhagavan. So that's where the word Andal comes from, because before then she was just Kodai.
Even present day, I mean, in all Sri Vaishnava temples, you can see her presence, and of course through the Thiruppavai. And it's wonderful that I really enjoyed that story, and it's beautiful how that Bhakti transformed into this text that is recited so extensively in temples. Tell me a little more about her work and how that impacted the Bhakti movement, inspiring the likes of Ramanujacharya, like spreading all over India.
Yeah, so she composed Nachaya Tirumari and Tiruppavai. So these were her sort of two compositions, and these are so critically important in Sri Vaishnavism, and they inspired Sri Ramanujacharya, who was he's very famous for being an exponent of Sri Vaishnavism.
Yes, of course.
And because she inspired him a lot, and his work spread like wildfire across Bharat, and it set off these epicenters of Bhakti. It started in Tamil Nadu, but it set it off in so many other parts of Bharat, and it inspired so many great saints and devotees. So yeah, it's absolutely revolutionary, her work. The whole Paavai literature actually is just so beautiful
and wow. So this very much ties in with our previous posts on female saints, and so like them, and if you had a chance to read them, I mean, if you haven't, the listeners listening in, please do go back, scroll down, or go through some of our other social media handles to have a look. Her life has been exemplary. A varikart is a Tamil word that roughly translates as an instruction manual or a guide to living. And so there have been many examples of female saints in the Sanatana Dharma tradition that have been observed with a lot of attention, including celestial, particularly, I'm talking about female giants, and celestial beings such as Durga Mata, Kali Mata, and living devis such as Rani Lakshmi Bai of Jhansi, who all exhibit their power to establish Dharma with their sword on the field. However, in the 12 female saints post, we aimed to pay attention particularly to female intellectuals. And the ones that we looked at were Gargi, Sulabha, Karikala Maya, Ubhaya Bharati, Akkal Mahadevi, Lareshwari, Ganga Sati, Kanopatra, and Chandrabhati. These intellectuals demonstrated their agency through their literary prowess. Their triumph teaches us that for a woman to exercise her agency, she did not have to pick up her sword. She could also use her pen, debate, and ultimately her intellect. So, Yashoda, what do you think is the significance of her work on Tamil and the wider Hindu community?
The main significance of her and her work is that she's come down to guide us and lead us by example. So then comes the question, right? So why do I need a guide? Because we have so many scriptures, we have so many books, we have a wealth of resources. So why do I need someone to show me how to live? And the reason is that there's a lot of theoretical knowledge which she simplifies and feeds it to us. And you need it to come from a leader who has lived it, because otherwise, without that practical evidence of it, it'll be like trying to become a doctor by just reading books. It's not, because our dharma is a practiced thing, right? It's not something that is just known. So we need to be guided in that way. And she has done that so beautifully because she's taken the role of a guru by kind of teaching us. She's also taken the role of a mother. She's tayar, which means mother. And she kind of addresses us in such a friendly way. So she takes that kind of sthana as well as a tori or a friend. So I think she has just come down and she's shown us how to do bhakti.
We've mentioned bhakti a few times. So what is bhakti?
Bhakti is love and devotion to a personalized form of Bhagavan. So we have so many existential questions that are being discussed in our scriptures about the nature of reality and consciousness, and what is Brahman, what is Prakriti, what is this, what is that, what is Atma, what are all the yogas and all that, right? But the kind of simplest, most enjoyable and most effective way to kind of approach all these things is through bhakti. So if we kind of established that this is what bhakti is, then, and its significance, then comes the question, so how do we perform bhakti? And once again, for that, we can look at her work and her life to get to know that. So the first way is by what we're doing right now, actually, just listening, shravanam. So she was listening to her guru and father, and that's how her journey into bhakti started. So that's the first thing. And then we can also look at what other things she did, right? So, Inniseyal paadi koduttal narpamale. So she sang the verses beautifully like a garland and offered that to Vishnu. And this refers to Namasankirtanam or Namasmaranam, Pamale. So that is remembering and singing the names and glories of Bhagavan. And Pumale Sudi Kodale Sudu. So the actual flower garland, so Pushpa Kainkariam, just for offering flowers and serving in that way. And we also see that she, goes to the temple to perform all these things, right? And worship and all that. So Alaya Varipad, going to mandirs and engaging there is another great way to just perform bhakti.
Satsang is another really good one, because the
Absolutely.
people around us are so important to shape our thinking and they have a deep impact. Whoever we surround, we tend to take on from that as well. So to have good company is so important. Yes.
Yeah, and I think kind of going off on that, I think Harikatha Smaranam, right? So when you're with your satsang, so when you're in good company, you can listen to and talk about these stories and learn together. And it's such an engaging way and effective way of approaching all of this, I think.
Wonderful, wonderful. We've seen a summary of Sri Andal Mata's life, and now to explore her work, Thiruppavai. So we've seen how her devotion, her bhakti, from childhood through growing up eventually expresses itself in its original form, the Tiruppavai. So just speak us a little bit about that part of her life.
So the Thiruppavai part of her life started sort of when she'd said she'd accepted Krishna alone as her husband, and she had learned from her father and guru Periyarvar about the story of how the gopis in Gokul performed this vrat to Katyayani Devi, who is a form of Parvati, in order to get her blessing to obtain Krishna as their husband. So she wanted to imitate that whole thing, and in her bhakti towards Vishnu or Krishna, she thought of her birthplace, Srivilliputturu, as Gokul. She thought of her local river as the Yamuna, and she thought of all her friends as fellow Gopi girls and herself as a Gopi girl. And the kind of first tenet of that vrat is to wake up early and go bathe in the river. So to do that, she gets up and she goes and knocks on all her friends' houses' doors and wakes them up. And that act of her waking up and the verses she sings as she's waking them up is what the Tiruppavai is all about. So they all come together, do this vrat, and then go to the local temple and see Vadapatrashai, who's the Murti in that temple. So because of that, the Tiruppavai is sung in remembrance of everything she did. The temples also recreate this wedding in a function called Andal Kalyanam, and it's just a very beautiful festival that is accompanied by live discourses on the hidden philosophical tenets of the Tiruppavai.
So similar to how the Bhagavad Gita, the essence of the Mahabharata is as it's commonly known, this is the essence of the Vedas, which are so extensive. And we know, like, the Rig Veda itself has 16,000 verses. And to say, all four Vedas summarized, I think that's incredible. So the beautiful thing is it doesn't even feel that dense. It doesn't feel like all that information has been compacted. So yeah, it's incredible.
So why don't we hear some of the Tiruppavai? So can you sing us a pasuram?
Yes, so we can have a look at the first of the 30 pasarams of Thiruppavai, and it's you can give us a translation and perhaps say a few words on the significance behind this wonderful pasuram. Sure.
Margazhi tingal madi niraindha nannalal, Margazhi tingal madi niraindha nannalal, நீராட போதுவீர் போதுமினோ நேரிழையீர், சீர்மல்குமாய் பாடி செல்வ சிறுமீர்கால் கூர்வேல் கொடுந்தொழிலன் நந்தகோபன் குமரன், ஏரார்ந்த கண்ணி யசோதையிலம் சிங்கம் கார்மேனி செங்கண் கதிர்மதியம் போல் முகத்தான், நாராயணனே நமக்கே பறை தருவான், நாராயணனே நமக்கே பறை தருவான், பாரோர் புகழ படிந்தேலோரெம் பாவாய்.
Each line, each word of the Tiruppavai has so much inner meaning, and it's been analyzed in so much depth that I think we can only go for a sort of literal rough translation for now. So we'll do that.
Sure.
So it starts with Margazhi, right? So Margazhi tingal madi niraindha nannal. So it's a good full moon day in the month of Margazhi. What an auspicious day it is. Neerada poduvir podumino neeriyir. So she's saying to all her friends and gopis, she's saying, come along, let's go bathe in the river, oh dear ornamented, prosperous young girls of Gokul. Now, she then goes on to talk about how Krishna is the son of Nanda. So she says, Kurvel Korundorilan Nandagopan Kumaran. So she's saying, Kurvel Korundorilan, that is Nandagopal, who holds a sharp spear. His son, Kumaran, is Krishna. Now she goes on to describe Krishna. She says, Yeranda Kanni. So Krishna, who has beautiful eyes. Yashode Ilamjingam or Ilamsingam. He's the lion cub of Yashoda. And then goes on Karmeni. So he has a dark cloud-like complexion, divine complexion. Stengan, reddish eyes. Kadirmadiyam Pol Mugattan, face as radiant as the sun and moon. And then she says, Narayanane Namakke Paraidarvan. So Narayana Bhagavan himself will surely yield to us alone a present or a gift of some sort. And she ends with Paror Pugara Padindelo Rembavai. So let's resort to him and do this Paavai Vrat, and which will in turn please people of high wisdom and esteem. That's sort of a rough literal translation.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. And it all centers around Anbu, which is Anbu is a Tamil word for the equivalent of like love, caring, and it's the language is so poetic, and it's interesting that it's set in Ragam Nate, which is a scale in Carnatic music, usually used to denote the start of a concert or a musical session. So wow, I mean, we've so far looked at the first of the Tiruppavai, a Pasaram, and we've spoken a little bit about Sri Andal Devi, her life, and I mean her life as a Bhakt, as an intellectual, we know is exemplary. Now let's look at the language in more detail, and I know you gave us an introduction. I mean, her work is so unique and in its style and structure, but the style in addressing her girls as Paavai, and so this all centers around the language, right, and its significance and its deeply rooted way of communicating to her beloved Bhagavan.
Yeah, I think, yeah, as you said, her language is very ornamented, and throughout she references so many leelas or pastimes of Krishna Bhagavan along the way. But touching on that kind of style of her language that you spoke about, it can be quite discerning. So she's not only talking about the things you should do, things you shouldn't do, she's also talking, in some verses she talks very lovingly to her friends, saying, please wake up, and she kind of coaxes them. And in other verses she sort of she you know, kind of shows that discernment, as you said. She's like, okay, get up. And this is to be read as her being a maternal figure, waking us up from our own ignorance, and awakening that, and bringing us closer to that chitta shuddhi that we want. So the clarity and purity of consciousness. And I think it's the most beautiful thing about it all is that she isn't just going off on her own and doing this, that in every single verse she's waking other people up and bringing them along with her. So this isn't just her own journey. It's not disconnected. She is bringing everyone along with her, and I think that's just.
I
so
really
beautiful.
like that. I love that aspect of this is waking us up from our own, you know, ignorance or sleep in some sort of way. You know, we are unaware of what we could be aware of, and yeah, and she's waking us up in a loving, sometimes motherly, sometimes as a friend, and you know, sometimes being a bit tougher when it's required, right? Because we're all different, and so that's lovely.
Yeah. So let's talk a bit on the wider significance. So tell us about, if you could, about how this month is celebrated overall and in other forms, in its kind of overall spiritual significance.
Yeah, sure. So in Tamil Nadu, the month of Margasisha, or Margari as it's known, is held in high reverence by sadhakas of many traditions. And it's known to be one of the most important months for spiritual growth in particular. The month is named after the star Mrigasisha, and this is the month in which the moon appears closest to the star. The word Margasisha roughly translates as that which leads us towards the path. This can be seen as a month that leads one onto a path towards her or his goal. The birth of the Bhagavad Gita, an important text in Sanatana Dharma, is celebrated on the 11th day of this month. In Shloka 35 of chapter 10, in Vibhuti Yogaha, Sri Krishna Paramatma says, Masanam Margasishoham. He refers to himself as this month, indicating that he can be the one that leads us onto the path towards the divine. If we so choose, because of course Krishna Bhagavan gives us the free will, and if we are actively seeking out to get to that path onto the divine. Several important utsavs are celebrated in this period, including Mitra Saptami, Kala Bhairava Ashtami, Arudra Darshanam, Dattreya Jayanti, and Makaravelak. I'll talk a little bit about a really important one, Arudra Darshanam and Tiruvadire in Shaivism. So it's observed on the full moon day of the month of Margari. It's considered to be the longest night of the year. Devotees observe the Nataraja form, the dancing form of Bhagavan Shiva. It's celebrated with great fervor in Thillai Chidambaram temple in the form of Nataraja Bhagavan. Chidambaram is a very important temple in Shaivism, and Bhagavan Shiva is in the form of Nataraja there. So Thiruppavai, which is very similar sounding to Thiruppavai, has a similar theme of waking up in the Saiva Siddhantam tradition. It is a collection of songs dedicated to Shiva Bhagavan, written by Manikya Vasagar, and he describes Bhagavan in many ways, starting off the first poem of the Thiruppavai by reciting, rough translation, we are singing of that rare great flame that has no beginning and no end.
Wow.
It is part of a wider collection of songs known as Tiruvasagam, also originating in Tamil Nadu.
Lovely. So you mentioned, so in Sri Vaishnavism and Shaivism, how this time is important for, different schools of thought and different traditions. So as a sadhaka in one of these traditions, what and how is it important?
It's a period of the year where it gets the coldest. So since the days are shorter and the overall temperatures are lower, it's conducive, especially in tropical climates like Bharat, to practice sadhana or spiritual practices. So one doesn't get that tired that easily. The next season, Uttarayanam as it's known, is the period where one typically reaps the results of the year. So in agricultural terms, of course, it's the form of harvest. So you have the harvest festivals occurring in that period, but this also applies very much to the results of a sadhaka's or devotees' efforts, spiritual efforts. So hence, this last month before the results manifest is quite important. It's the last opportunity to, accelerate the process of our spiritual practices or sadhanas. So typically bhaktas indulge in bhajan, in prayer, including stotra, puja, and vrat. And it's an important month musically also. The Margari Maha Utsavam is the festival that draws people from all over Bharat to come together and sing and perform, in particular, Carnatic music in Chennai. So yes, I mean, wow, I mean, we've covered quite a lot, haven't we? And we've seen what Margari is. We've spoken about the focus and the significance of the month of Margari, in which Paavai Nonbu is done. We've seen an example of Tiruppavai, and we've spoken about its significance. We've tied this in with our mention of the work of the 12 saints we covered earlier on in the year. And it's incredible that we are singing to this very day the work of 8th century works. So coming back to present day, while we have the privilege of these 8th century works, why should students be listening and on our campuses and know about Andal Mata?
I think we should still be taking notice of Margazhi and Andal and Paavai literature in general, because it's still just so relevant, right? The fact that in Tamil Nadu, in every single district, there are homes and temples, mandirs that are still reciting and talking about and discussing these works. And it's not just localized there. The fact that there are pockets of communities all over the globe that are still living this tradition just means that for our wider Hindu community, for our Samaj, this is part of us. So I think this is something to take notice of.
And gaining inspiration from just, as you were saying, ways of performing bhakti, observing and seeing her exemplary life and trying to emulate that to a certain extent.
Yeah, absolutely. But how do you think the current Hindu youth can participate in this? Like, what should we do?
We could start off by listening and finding out about what great such saints are actually saying by reading the translation. And you gave us a wonderful translation of the first Vasaram. But we can look at, from a credible academic source, what does it mean? I mean, we are a diverse community, and but there is a language barrier because we don't speak all the regional languages of Bharat. And also for someone in the UK who perhaps hasn't had exposure to it, you hear something, but you can tell maybe that it sounds nice, but you don't know what it means. So you can start off first by doing something as simple as listening to Tiruppavai on YouTube. You can find many online resources where you can find purports and meanings on these resources. Credible, I would definitely say, because you should look for sources that are very credible. We also post on the NHSF UK social media about great female saints, as we did earlier this year for Navaratri. The Margazhi Mahotsavam is also a time where artists offer Tiruppavai, which is a very central and core part of the festival. So you can listen to that on YouTube. If you're fortunate enough to actually go to India in this sort of December time, please do take go listen to some of these concerts, and if you get a chance, go one step further and actually visit the temples of South India, and such as Sri Rangam and Chidambaram, where you will hear Tirupalli Alaichi, which is that awakening of the chit. And so it helps us practice our bhakti. It helps students connect. It's a method. It's the answer to your question, which is how we can connect and get onto that spiritual path. So in the process of us learning about these regional saints, we may even notice similarities to the way that we in particular practice our bhakti.
Absolutely, and I think the bhava is so similar, right? So even if the region changes, the bhakti doesn't change. So we're likely to notice these similarities. And if there's a regional thing like this that you haven't heard of before, I think it might be a great fun thing to explore.
I've really enjoyed this discussion on the month of Margazhi, Sri Andal Devi, and the significance of Tiruppavai. Thank you to all of our listeners for listening in. Please get in touch with us on our NHSF UK social media channels to find out more about the various topics we explore on great female saints in Bharat. Namaste.
Namaste.